It was early, very early. Most of the people were still in their homes asleep. Mary, the mother of James, myself, and a few other women were on our way to the garden where the body of Jesus was buried just 3 days before. We were bringing spices to anoint the body of Jesus, and we were wondering who were we going to get to roll the stone away from the tomb. As we were walking, we were talking about the events of the past week, and I could still hear it in my head. The chanting, crucify, crucify, crucify him, crucify him. Sometimes I can still hear it in my head. We arrived at the tomb just before daybreak. As we neared the grave, my heart stopped beating, just for a moment. And then I could feel it in my throat. It was very obvious that the stone had already been rolled away. My first thought was that someone had stolen the body of my Lord.
An elite group of Caesar's finest soldiers had been assembled to guard the tomb to make sure that the disciples of Jesus could not steal his body and proclaim he had risen from the dead. I was put in charge, and I was standing guard nearest the great stone that was placed in front of the tomb of this man who now lay in there, this man called Jesus, who they claimed to be the Messiah of the Jewish people. I watched him hanging on that cross, watched him as he labored to breathe, his body arching up, straining to draw in just enough breath to fill his lungs. I was there when he said his last words, "It is finished." I am the one who thrusts a spear into his side and watched the blood and water flow. Then came the earthquake, the darkness, the lightning. I knew deep within me the truth. Something in my soul spoke to me that truly this man was the Son of God.
Friday was the most horrific day in history. I was standing in the throne room of the Great Holy One. Never had I seen him so sad. He was watching the activities taking place on a little hill called Golgotha. He heard the groans of agony coming from his only son as he was being sacrificed to pay the debt of sin. But really, there was no other choice. Sin had corrupted the earth. Somehow, some way, restitution had to be made. Jesus was the one to make that restitution. So hanging on the cross, he had heaven tightly grasped in one hand, and with the other, he had all the sin and evil and wickedness of the world. Christ became the bridge between God and man, between heaven and earth. So hanging there, with both arms stretched out, as far as they would go, he was saying to all of humanity, past, present, and future, I love you this much. When his son cried out in despair, "Why hast thou forsaken me?" I watched God turn his back and walk away. Then Jesus died.
I was sleeping. Well, trying to sleep. I really hadn't slept for 3 days. Every time I tried, I could just hear that rooster relentlessly echoing in my head. And why I had denied knowing Christ? I just told him that I would follow him, even if it meant my own death. But I denied him. I told him I didn't know him. I didn't know him. I didn't know him. I didn't know him? Of course I knew him. We fished. We had dinner. I watched him perform a multitude of miracles. He allowed me to walk on the water with him. He washed my feet. But still, I denied him. Not once, not twice, but 3. 3! And I went and hid. Like a child, I ran and hid. I was so afraid of being arrested. Why was he arrested? No one seemed to know. Even though I was hiding, I knew everything that was happening.
It had been 3 days since they crucified Jesus. Heaven had been eerily silent. But on the third day, there seemed to be a feeling of great expectation. Another angel and I were summoned to the throne room of the Great Holy One. The Creator of heaven and earth quickly explained his plan to us. After receiving our assignment, we immediately departed to the tomb where Jesus lay. We were extremely excited about what God the Father was about to do. We arrived in the garden with such force that the ground shook.
As we stood guarding the tomb, I watched in amazement as these veteran warriors became filled with terror. It was late at night. Actually, it was closer to morning. And then we heard the sound of this mighty rushing wind, or maybe it was a warm hypnotic breeze. And then this brilliant flash of light, or maybe it was a dark shadow. I really can't tell. We all became very confused as to what was happening. And then the earth began to violently shake. We lost our footing. Somehow we all became unconscious. And when we awoke, we saw that the tomb was empty. The stone had been rolled away, and the soldiers fled. They were horrified at the reality of what would happen to them when the Roman government found out what had happened. But I just stood there. I could feel God speaking to my soul, again confirming somehow that this man Jesus was more than just a man. I have no doubt that somehow, somewhere, some way, Jesus was alive.
We couldn't help it but to be amused at the reaction of the soldiers. We easily moved the stone away from the entrance of the tomb. We walked into that grave and saw the body of Christ laying there. It could have been very discouraging, but God had already told us his plan. As we stood by the body, we felt a very gentle breeze begin to blow. Within the breeze, there was an extremely sweet fragrance that seemed to fill the tomb. We could actually see the breeze as it became a fine mist that settled over Jesus. And we watched as God breathed the breath of life into his Son. Jesus was alive. He stood up and left the grave clothes where they lay, except for the cloth he had covered his face. He took that cloth and neatly folded it and placed it by itself.
I could see that the body of my Lord was gone. What do I do? Where can I go? I have to find the disciples. Maybe they will know what to do. Maybe they even know what happened. I kept running until I found Simon Peter and the other disciple that Jesus loved. I told them what happened, and they seemed just as surprised as I was. Together we all ran to the tomb. The other disciple just looked in, but Simon Peter, he went into the tomb.
Mary was frantic when she saw us. She found us and told us that Jesus was no longer in the tomb. How could this be? We ran to the tomb, stepped inside. Sure enough, the tomb was empty. I wondered why they removed the linen clothes that wrapped his body. As I looked closer, I realized that the linens were laying there in the same way that they were wrapped around his body. Sure enough, the body had disappeared and the linens were still there. The napkin that was across his face was neatly folded and sat there by itself. You know, it didn't make sense right away. That folded napkin told me that he was planning on returning. I desperately tried to recall all the lessons that he told us and taught us. Was there some clue that I missed? Everything that we were witnessing led us to believe that Jesus was alive.
Simon Peter and the other disciple, they went back home. But I just stood there weeping. I just could not comprehend what had taken place. Maybe in my grief, I had just imagined all of this. I stooped down and looked into the tomb. And when I did, I saw two men inside, sitting on each side of the place where Jesus' body was laid. One of them asked me why I was weeping. I told him that I was looking for the body of Jesus. And I looked around behind me and I saw someone that I thought was the gardener. And he too asked me, "Why are you weeping?" And I told him that I was looking for the body of my Lord. And when I did, he said my name. My name. Mary. I thought it was really strange. But then it dawned on me. The voice was very familiar. It was the voice of Jesus. My master. How could I have not known the voice of my master? How many times had he forgiven me? I ran to throw my arms around him, but he stopped me. He said that he had to ascend to his Father. His Father. My Father. His God. My God. Even though I couldn't touch him, I knew Jesus was alive. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive.